Imagine you spend like years meticulously building this dark, violent fantasy world.
Right, it's just pouring your soul into it.
Exactly. You pour your entire psychological and creative reservoir into this one huge project, and you finally hit #1 on Amazon.
Which is huge.
It is. And when release day arrives, you know, that mythical finish line where you're supposed to be popping champagne and weeping tears of cinematic joy.
Cue the confetti.
Right, cue the confetti. But your actual celebration consists of eating a donut while arguing with Amazon customer service.
Oh, it's so real.
Over a shipping delay that you have absolutely no control over. So welcome to a brand new deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today's source material is not a victory lap.
Yeah.
It is this brutal, totally unfiltered look at the hidden reality of the modern creator economy.
It really is a masterclass.
Yeah, we are looking at a multi-hour live stream transcript from Amazon best-selling indie author Jenna Moreci.
And she fired up her webcam to celebrate the release of her highly anticipated dark romantic The Savior's Army.
Yep, Savior's Army. And instead of a party, she gave us a masterclass in just the unglamorous reality of digital survival.
The contrast is honestly immediately jarring.
Oh, totally.
It serves as this perfect dissection of the cognitive dissonance between, audience expectations and the lived reality of an independent artist.
Because the chat is just flooding her screen.
Right, with all these euphoric comments, they're asking if she's like vibrating with excitement.
And she's just like, no.
Exactly. She establishes this boundary of pure exhaustion. She is actively fighting off fatigue.
With donuts.
With a massive box of donuts. She specifically cites cinnamon twists and chocolate.
Oh, and apple fritters?
Right, the apple fritters were for her husband, Cliff.
Yeah, and she is pausing to play fetch with her dog, Butter.
It just completely strips away the Hollywood trope of the triumphant author.
It really does.
And replaces it with the grinding endurance of, like, a small business owner who just desperately wants to go to sleep.
But, I mean, isn't that just kind of the hidden tax of the indie publishing dream?
How do you mean?
Well, you decide to cut out the traditional publishing gatekeeper.
Right, so you can keep the lion's share of the royalties.
Exactly, and maintain total creative control. But if you demand the whole pie, you have to bake.
And serve it.
And wash the dish. You can't really complain when the public looks at you to fix the plumbing.
Well, you're identifying the core vulnerability of the independent model there. Total control necessitates total liability.
Yeah, that.
The creator is no longer just the artist. They are the logistics coordinator.
The marketing department.
The crisis management team. Like when a reader comments on the live stream that Amazon is predicting a July delivery for a book they ordered in early spring.
Which is insane.
It is insane. But the reader views the author as the point of sale.
Oh, like it's her fault.
Exact. Jenna has to patiently explain the systemic mechanics of global distribution.
That she doesn't have a warehouse in her backyard.
Right. She doesn't package the books. She is at the absolute mercy of Amazon's algorithmic fulfillment centers.
Which completely shatters that romanticized image of the writer, secluded in a cabin in the woods.
Just letting the muse flow into a typewriter.
Right. Amidst this sugar crash survival mode on her live stream, she is doing heavy administrative lifting in real time.
Oh, she's multitasking like crazy.
She's organizing a massive 10-book giveaway that spans multiple social media ecosystems.
Which is a nightmare.
And she's fielding these complex international emails regarding the translation rights for her nonfiction writing craft books.
Like, shut up and write the book.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and the translation rights alone represent this labyrinth of intellectual property law.
That she's just navigating by herself.
Navigating without a dedicated foreign rights department. Yeah.
Yep.
And this administrative burden severely impacts her strategy for the book's other formats.
Oh, right, the audio.
Yeah, the live stream reveals a deep hesitation regarding the production of an audiobook for The Savior's Army.
Because of the contract.
She explicitly details dreading the specific legal framework she utilized for her previous...
Because it locked her into a 7-year distribution contract.
7 years.
7 years in the digital space is a geological era.
It really is.
I mean, think about where the creator economy was 7 years ago compared to today.
Completely different landscape.
Signing away audio exclusivity for nearly a decade seems like a terrifying trap for an independent business.
A business that relies entirely on agility.
Right. Why would that even be the standard?
Well, it is a mechanism designed by massive distribution platforms to consolidate market share.
Oh, of course.
By locking independent creators into long-term exclusivity agreements, the platform ensures a monopoly on that specific intellectual property.
So the author can't pivot.
Exactly, preventing the author from pivoting to new, potentially more lucrative models.
Or like new subscription services that might pop up over a decade.
Precise. For an indie author whose primary advantage is the ability to pivot instantly to market trends, a 7-year anchor is a massive strategic.
So her mind on release day isn't dwelling on the prose she wrote.
No, it is burdened by the financial and legal calculus of her next logistical maneuver.
And we see that intense strategic calculus in where she actually places her books, too.
Oh, definitely.
Like, she mentions that the previous installments of this dark Romantasy series are enrolled in Kindle Unlimited, or KU.
Right.
And she points out a very specific market reality. Romantasy as a genre absolutely dominates the Kindle Unlimited ecosystem.
It acts as a massive funnel for new readers.
Yeah, but then, almost in the same breath, she contemplates shifting her upcoming rom-com project to a traditional publishing house.
Which is a fascinating...
It is, especially despite knowing how notoriously glacial traditional publishing is compared to the rapid-fire indie model.
Well, to understand that pivot, we really have to look at the underlying mechanics of Kindle Unlimited versus traditional publishing.
Okay, break that down.
So KU operates on a shared global fund where authors are paid out based on the Kindle edition normalized page count.
The KENPC algorithm.
Exactly. You are literally paid fractions of a cent per page read.
Oh, wow. Fractions of a cent.
Yes. So this incentivizes a specific type of reading behavior and a specific type of writing.
Like rapid releases.
Rapid releases, massive cliffhangers, and highly addictive genres like romantic.
Things that encourage readers to just devour thousands of pages in a weekend.
Right. Traditional publishing, conversely, operates on an advance against royalties model.
You get a lump sum up front.
You are paid up front regardless of immediate page turn, which affords the author more time between...
And wider distribution to physical bookstores.
Exactly.
So she is basically acting as a multifaceted publishing executive.
Totally.
Actively analyzing which business model best serves the specific neurological and behavioral profile of the target audience.
For each distinct genre she writes.
Yeah. She knows Romantasy readers are these voracious digital consumers who thrive in the KU binge model.
While a standalone rom-com might benefit from the slower, wider physical footprint.
Which makes perfect sense. But to me, release day for an indie author sounds like the day after a massive wedding.
No, that's a great one.
You know, you spent years planning it. Everyone expects you to be glowing and ecstatic.
And taking photos.
Right. But really, your feed just hurt. You just want to eat leftover cake and sweat.
Leftover cake, or in this case,
Exactly. And the cognitive load of making those executive macroeconomic decisions while trying to manage a live audience is immense.
That cognitive exhaustion bleeds directly into the actual mechanics of her writing process.
Because the logistical burnout of being your own publisher drains your battery so severely
That when you finally sit down to draft the manuscript,
your patience for the tedious foundational elements of storytelling is completely shot.
yes, which leads to this fascinating moment in the stream where consistent internet rumor about her creative process.
Oh, the rumor mill.
The phenomenon of the parasocial micro.
Let's talk about that. For years, there has been this haunting allegation circling her online presence.
That she hates world building.
Yes, that she hates world building. And on the stream, she finally corrects the record.
She clarifies that she actually loves world building.
Right. She meticulously researches flora, fauna, historical clothing, and cultural maps.
She loves the details.
What she actually stated in like a poorly interpreted comment years ago is that she hates writing transition.
Right. The internet inherently flattens nuance.
It really does.
It strips away technical distinctions to create easily digestible, often polarizing narrative.
So her highly specific structural frustration of writing a scene transition
Was algorithmically and socially flattened into this clickbait concept that a fantasy author despises create worlds.
That's why. But let's look at the actual mechanic of a transition. Are transitions essentially just the loading screens of a novel?
Oh, loading screen. That is a highly accurate conceptualization.
Because think about it. You have this beautifully rendered environment in chapter 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then an epic, emotionally devastating boss battle in chapter 2.
Right.
But the author has to force the reader to wait while the characters physically travel the 10 miles between those 2 points without losing their attention.
You are dealing with the invisible architecture of narrative momentum.
The invisible architecture. I like that.
When a transition is executed flawless, the reader's brain does not even register the passage of time or distance.
You don't even notice you're traveling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for the author, Generating that seamless illusion requires a massive amount of spatial awareness, temporal continuity, and pacing calibration.
It sounds exhausting.
It is the literary equivalent of trudging through the snow.
She gives a brilliant, highly specific example of why she struggles with this, actually.
Oh, getting drunk off of telling.
She says she gets drunk off of telling. We always hear that golden rule of creative writing, right? Show, don't tell.
Standard advice.
But transitions are the one specific area where you actually have to tell in order to condense time.
You can't show every single footstep of a 3-day journey.
Right. The mechanism of that struggle is so fascinating to us.
Well, she has trained her brain to operate in highly detailed, immersive scenes.
Showing every detail.
Exactly. So when she is forced to switch into the summarizing mode required for a transition, she loses her grip on the page.
She explains that once she starts telling to get the characters across the map, the momentum just takes over.
Right. She accidentally summarizes the events of the entire next chapter in a single paragraph.
Because her brain is so desperate to just arrive at the emotionally resonant plot points.
Yeah. She then has to forcefully reverse engineer her own writing.
Delete the summary.
Delete the summary and rebuild the actual scenes.
It's like accidentally hitting fast forward on a movie because you want to see the explosion.
Yep.
And then realizing you completely skipped the dialogue that explains why the bomb was planted in the first.
It requires extreme discipline to force yourself to walk at a normal pace when your brain already knows the destination.
And that structural discipline extends to how she categorizes her own work, too.
Which reveals a completely different facet of her creative arc.
Yes, the naming convention. This is where we see her absolute demand for precision.
Very.
A fan asks about her 4-book series, and she flat out refuses to call it a quartet.
Right. She insists on the term tetralogy.
Tetralogy. And her reasoning isn't just an arbitrary preference. It's rooted entirely in her background as a stringed instrument player.
She is applying the structural taxonomy of music theory to literary categorization.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
In musical performance, a quartet consists of 4 musicians playing different instruments simultaneously.
To create a single, unified piece of music.
Exactly. The defining characteristic is the concurrent execution. They happen at the same time.
Right. So applying that term to 4 books that are consumed sequentially, one after the other over a period of years.
It creates a structural paradox in her mind.
She even rejects the term duet for a 2-book series.
Yes, she argues that a duet implies companion pieces meant to be experienced in tandem.
Whereas sequential books should just be a duology.
Her brain demands structural accuracy based on a completely different art framework.
It demonstrates how cross-disciplinary knowledge shapes an artist's internal logic.
Her musical training established a rigid framework for how sequential and concurrent media
and any deviation from that framework feels inherently incorrect.
Even if the wider publishing industry uses the terms interchangeably all the time.
Yeah, she won't budge on it.
Yeah.
And that same highly specific internal logic dictates how she injects levity into her incredibly dark narratives.
A humor.
There is a deeply revealing moment in the source where a fan brings up a specific fan-favorite line of dialogue.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Character is heavily under the influence of narcotics. She refers to it as the tripping balls scene.
Right.
And this character loudly declares that he radiates, quote, with the power of 1,000 cocks.
A phrase that has apparently generated significant cultural traction within her readership.
Oh yeah, leading to immediate demands for merchandise and apparel during the live stream.
T-shirts are actively being conceptualized in the chat.
But the origin of this joke is a masterclass in creative synthesis.
It really is.
She explained that she personally does not consume drugs, so she couldn't pull from direct physiological experience to write a hallucination scene.
So she had to improvise.
Right. She had to access her memories of being around deeply intoxicated people during her college days.
She specifically anchored the dialogue to a chaotic, nonsensical phrase her husband Cliff slurred years ago when he was drunk.
And to set the internal pacing of the scene, she wrote it while blasting the 1990s Eurodance anthem, We Like to Party, by the Venga Boys.
The Venga Boy. The psychological layering here is so complex.
Tell me about it.
You have a high-stakes, violent, dark fantasy, and to relieve the narrative tension, she injects the manic, synthetic energy of a 1990s dance track.
Filtered through a highly personal, nostalgic memory of her spouse's localized absurdity.
She is synthesizing disparate sensory inputs to manufacture a specific comedic freak.
But the profound isolation of the writing process almost killed the joke before it reached the audience.
She admits she was terrified to leave the line in the manuscript.
She was convinced people wouldn't understand the tonal shift, that they would just find it weird or jarring or boring
It survived only because her assistant, Grace, read the draft and validated her.
Which highlights the inherent fragility of the creative feedback loop, right?
An author can spend months agonizing over the invisible architecture of a
Or the precise synthesis of a comedic.
but they're ultimately operating in a vacuum. The fear that an attempt at levity will shatter the reader's immersion rather than enhance anxiety.
You do not know if the frequency you're broadcasting is coherent until another human mind receives the signal.
And that anxiety is magnified exponentially when the core genre you are writing becomes fundamentally incompatible with the reality you are living.
Which brings us to the most visceral and demanding section of this source material.
The delay of the book.
Right. The fans keep asking why The Savior's Army took so long to write. Why the massive delay?
And she doesn't offer a polished PR.
Not at all. She delivers a devastatingly blunt reality. She states, quote, "Why did it take so long? Because Cliff almost died. More than one."
It forcibly removes the curtain between the content consumption machine and the fragile human infrastructure that powers.
She details that her husband has been enduring severe, cascading medical trauma for the past 5 years.
Their daily realities of endless hospital stays and nursing homes.
She jokes, as a coping mechanism, obviously, that she can flawlessly mimic the exhausted tone of a nurse demanding that a patient their activity.
But the reality is terrifying. Cliff currently has what she describes as cyborg implants.
Cyborg implant, specifically spinal cord stimulators surgically implanted to manage his condition.
The source material illustrates how the mundane, bureaucratic nightmare of chronic illness bleeds directly into the supposedly triumphant moments of...
Because even on the morning of her book release, she isn't celebrating.
No, she is trapped on the phone with medical equipment.
Desperately trying to determine if Cliff is legally and physically permitted to undergo an MRI.
Given the specific metallic composition of his spinal...
Like, how does an artist maintain the capacity to invent fictional trauma when they are drowning in actual clinical trauma?
It's almost impossible.
She explains that this medical reality is the exact reason she is pivoting away from dark romantasy and toward rom-coms.
Right. The Savior series is heavily focused on themes of complex bloodshed and extreme violence.
And she clarifies that under normal circumstances, she deeply enjoys writing high-stakes violence.
But we are observing a critical psychological threshold being breached here.
An artist's emotional capacity is finite.
Exactly. When your waking life is defined by chronic medical terror and the acute daily threat of losing your spouse.
Your nervous system is trapped in a permanent state of fight or flight.
The act of sitting down at a keyboard to voluntarily generate scenes of life or death, stakes, violence, and profound trauma ceases to be a safe, creative exploration.
It becomes an unbearable, exhausting reiteration of your own localized nightmare. But I want to push back on the assumption that rom-coms are inherently the easy way out.
Let's hear it.
Is it that the writing itself is easier, or is it just that the emotional tax bracket is fundamentally different?
That's a great question.
Because she explicitly notes that she is still writing about trauma in her rom-coms.
She mentions characters dealing with the grief of losing parents.
Or characters navigating the daily friction of living with autism. It's not just pure frictionless fluff.
That is a crucial distinction to make. The pivot to romantic comedy is not a retreat from complex human emotion.
It's a recalibration of proximity.
Yes, the trauma depicted in her rom-com, grief, neurological friction, social isolation, does not trigger the specific acute trauma she's actively surviving.
Because the characters in her rom-coms are not bleeding out.
They are not waiting on life-altering MRI results.
Right.
By compartmentalizing her creative output, she transforms her imagination from a mirror reflecting her daily horror into a sanctuary where the stakes are...
It fundamentally changes how we as consumers view genre trends, doesn't it?
Oh, entirely.
We see an author abruptly shift from grimdark fantasy to a cozy rom-com. And the cynical, market-driven assumption is that they're just chasing a trend.
We think, oh, cozy fantasy is selling well right now. They're following the algorithm.
But the reality might be a pure, desperate, emotional survival tactic.
They're literally just trying to build a safe room inside their own mind where nobody is dying.
It demands a more empathetic framework for how we evaluate creative consistency.
It really does. We demand that artists continually produce within the exact tonal bandwidth we prefer.
Entirely forgetting that their output is inextricably tethered to the chaotic, often devastating fluctuations of their biological and emotional reality.
The sheer psychological resilience required to finish a dark, violent manuscript while navigating the corridors of a nursing home dagger.
And understanding how her brain processes that extreme threshold of trauma naturally leads us into a deep dive into her actual clinical neurology.
Right.
The Livestream takes a highly specific, remarkably transparent turn into her lived experience as a neurodivergent creator.
She explicitly identifies as autistic.
She provides a granular, unmasked view of neurodivergence that cuts through the superficial aesthetic often portrayed on social media.
Exactly. She casualizes the reality stimming.
Self-stimulatory behaviors used to regulate the nervous.
She talks about constantly bouncing in her chair, swaying her body, and fussing with her hair.
Which she notes is a complex intersection of autism and OCD that requires
But the physical stim that she focuses on is cricketing,
the continuous rhythmic rubbing together of her feet to generate sensory.
She also notes living with dyspraxia.
The dyspraxia, that's a neurological disorder that impacts physical coordination and motor planning, right?
Yes. When you combine the physical friction of dyspraxia with the sensory demands of autism, you begin to understand that navigating the physical world requires an immense amount of conscious manual
effort that neurotypical individuals just process automatically.
Exactly. But where her cognitive profile becomes truly fascinating is how she analyzes her own intelligence.
She acknowledges possessing a high IQ, but she immediately strips away the inherent superiority complex often attached to that metric.
She explains that a high IQ, within the context of her autistic brain, simply means possessing hyper-attuned pattern recognition.
She possesses a neurological mechanism that instantly identifies how disparate data points fit together.
Which is the exact neurological architecture required to successfully plot a massive, interlocking, 4-book fantasy epic.
Right. You have to hold an unfathomable amount of sequential data, political alliances, overlapping character arcs, and geographical timelines in your working memory simultaneously.
Her brain is a supercomputer designed for narrative art.
However, that same supercomputer comes with a devastating systemic cost when applied to the social reality of the real world.
The cost of masking.
She speaks candidly about the trauma of growing up undiagnosed.
Her pattern recognition allowed her to effortlessly dominate academic curricula.
But she was constantly penalized for failing to recognize invisible social patterns.
She recounts being constantly corrected for standing the wrong way.
Or holding her arms at an incorrect angle.
With absolutely no underlying logic provided as to why those arbitrary physical postures mattered to enforce them.
The profound exhaustion of masks. She details the reality of having daily autistic meltdowns the moment she returned home from school.
Because the sheer brute force cognitive effort of manually calculating and performing neurotypical social expectations all day completely drained her nerve.
And this leads this stream into a critical discussion about the physiological realities of neurodivergence.
We have to move beyond the behavioral quirks and look at the actual nerve.
The source introduces a clinical concept that is vital to understand: allodynia.
Yeah, the internet has completely warped how we view neurodivergence.
People think if they feel a slight tug when they take out a tight ponytail, they must be autistic.
It reduces clinical neurology to a quirky personality.
But the source introduces allodynia, and it made me realize how severe and systemic these sensory processing differences actually are.
We need to define allodynia clearly. It is not merely a heightened sensitivity.
Okay, what is it?
It is a profound neurological misfire where a stimulus that should not provoke a stimulus that is objectively non-threat is translated by the brain via agony.
The nociceptors, the sensory receptors for pain, are essentially sending a corrupted signal.
She notes that this is highly prevalent in neurodivergent individuals and specifically mentions its correlation with
Ehlers-Danlos, or EDS, being a connective tissue disorder that affects collagen production,
leading to hypermobility, fragile skin, and chronic joint.
So her physical vessel is fundamentally experiencing the world differently.
Precisely. The examples she provides in the source material are visceral.
Experiencing discomfort after wearing a tight hairstyle is universal.
But she describes the pain of a ponytail being so blindingly intense that her husband had to procure an old-fashioned ice pack just to numb her scalp.
But the most striking example involves the perception of comforting touch.
This blew my mind.
For most people, a light back scratch is soothing. It's an affectionate, calming input.
But she describes a scenario where her husband would gently rub or scratch her back to offer comfort.
And within 30 seconds, her nervous system would override the interaction.
To her brain, that light, repetitive friction was.
She states, it literally felt like being violently punched in the back with 1,000 knuckles.
Analyze the psychological impact of that translation error.
Her nervous system is taking an objectively gentle, loving, physical input and translating it into a signal of blunt force trauma.
When you realize that an author is navigating a physical reality that feels actively abusive,
a world where the very act of receiving affection trigger acute pain.
The appeal of a hyper-structured, predictable fantasy world that they built with their own hands becomes incredibly awesome.
If we're talking about hyper-structured, predictable systems built by her own hands, we have to talk about the greatest visual metaphor in the entire deep dive.
The lanyards.
The lanyards.
The lanyard segment elevates the live stream from a simple book promotion to a profound physical exhibition cognitive mapping.
It is release day. She's supposed to be marketing a dark fantasy novel about war and trauma.
Instead, she reaches off camera, pulls out a literal box of childhood crafts,
And asks the thousands of people watching, quote, "Can I be extremely autistic and show you my lanyards?"
and she just proudly begins displaying this massive, preserved archive of interwoven plastering.
It is vital to note that these are not the standard rudimentary box stitches one associates with summer camp craft.
Not even close. She shows the progression of her skill.
She starts with what she considers her worst piece, a simple, glow-in-the-dark rainbow weave.
But then she escalates into structural engineering.
She displays a massive, complex 3D chevron pattern,
She pulls out these intricate woven snakes that naturally curl back on themselves.
complete with little heads and split tongues mathematically engineered out of plastic string.
And the crown jewel of the collection is a piece she affectionately refers to as the beefy dinosaur.
Which is just an impossibly dense, chunky, complex weave.
This is not merely a tangent fueled by nostalgia.
No.
This is a profound physical manifestation of autistic pattern recognition and hyperfixation.
I was thinking about the actual mechanics of weaving a lanyard.
Break it down.
You are taking chaotic, loose, disparate threads of plastic, and you are applying a strict, repetitive mathematical pattern until they conform into a rigid, complex, three-dimensional structure. If you extrapolate that process, if you relate the complex, interwoven plastic strings of a lanyard to the complex, interwoven plot thread of a four-book fantasy tetralogy.
It is the exact same cognitive mechanism.
It really is.
It is the mathematics of narrative. Both disciplines require holding a staggering amount of sequential data and spatial relationships in your working memory.
To produce a coherent final architecture.
She explicitly mentions that during her time at camp, she was the designated starter.
She was the one who had to initiate the lanyards for the other children.
Because the hardest part is the setup.
Exactly. The most difficult phase of the mathematical pattern is the initial foundation.
Getting the architecture perfectly aligned so the rest of the pattern can flow logically.
This is a perfect parallel to her literary process.
The initial world building, the outlining, establishing the foundational rules of the magic system, and the...
Once that intricate starting pattern is established, the execution of the draft is a matter of hyper-focused, repetitive sequencing.
And the audience response to this was incredible.
The chat completely ignored the book for a moment and began literally begging her to launch a separate Twitch channel dedicated entirely to weaving lanyards.
Treating it as visual and auditory ASMR.
It proves that when someone drops the mask and displays genuine, unfiltered enthusiasm for a special interest, it is universally compelling.
It is a moment of pure, unmasked joy. And speaking of the artifacts from our past that we choose to preserve, the stream takes a very sharp, highly analytical turn.
Into the concept of early 2000s nostalgia.
And the profound psychological weight of confronting your own digital footprint.
We are the first generation in human history dealing with the permanent, searchable archiving of our own unformed identities.
During the stream, she starts casually scrolling through her own Facebook timeline from 2012.
And the physical cringe is immediate and visceral.
She reads a post she voluntarily shared back then that says, quote, "Smoke like Marley, dress like Barbie, party like Keisha."
Her immediate reaction is to clinically dissect the massive chasm between the persona she was projecting to the internet and her actual lived reality.
Right, she immediately defends herself to the chat, clarifying, "I didn't do any of those things."
She notes she did a little bit of modeling, so the Barbie aspect applied purely in a superficial play dress-up sense.
But she certainly wasn't smoking, and she wasn't partying like Keisha.
The entire post was performative. It was an aesthetic costume she was trying on to signal value to her peers.
Which naturally progresses into a highly sociological deconstruction of the not like other girls phenomenon.
The source explicitly frames this era of her life as a period dominated by internalized misogyny.
She details going through a severe, prolonged phase where she vehemently hated the color pink.
She actively rejected it in favor of jewel tone,
Specifically citing emerald green and ruby red.
as a way to physically distance herself from traditional femininity,
She was actively trying to prove to the world that she was a girl.
heavily aligning herself with rock and roll aesthetics to project complexity.
If we analyze this behavior through a sociological, the not like other girls is a well-documented survival mechanism functioning under a patriarchal structure.
When a society consistently devalues femininity,
When it categorizes the media, fashion, and interest interests traditionally associated with young women as frivolous, unintelligent, or weak.
The natural protective defense mechanism for a young woman desperate to be taken serious is to reject her own demographic.
It's an assimilation tactic.
You align yourself with the dominant, respected culture by mocking your own peer. You say, pink is for superficial girls. I listen to rock music. I have depth.
Precisely, and the arduous process of unlearning that deeply ingrained internalized misogyny,
of finally allowing oneself to genuinely embrace femininity without feeling intellectually diminished,
is a recognized psychological rite of passage for millennial women.
The source material highlights this evolution perfectly, contrasting her 2012 performative rejection of pink with her current reality,
where she proudly utilizes a hot pink graphical overlay for her release day and wields a pink Romantasy phone case.
But the psychological burden is that this journey of self-discovery is permanently documented.
You can't just burn your middle school diary in the backyard anymore.
It is sitting on a server farm in California, waiting to remind you of how embarrassing your defense mechanisms were.
It's like suddenly being handed a microphone at a party and forced to read your middle school diary aloud.
Exact. And alongside the evolution of social performance, the source also documents the physical evolution of the hardware we use to build those digital performances.
The stream delves into a deep retrospective on the lost aesthetic language of early 2000s cellular devices.
The nostalgia for the hardware is so potent, they trace the evolutionary tree.
First, only wealthy corporate executives possessed the massive, chunky car phones or Palm Pilot.
Then society transitioned to beepers and pagers.
And then came the explosion of personalized, hyper-stylized cell phones.
She talks about the grueling reality of having a basic Nokia track phone,
where you had to rely on T9 predictive text,
pressing the number 7 4 times just to produce the letter F.
The transition from functional utility to status.
Exact. Suddenly, everyone had to possess the incredibly thin Motorola Razr.
Then the cultural paradigm shifted to the T-Mobile side.
She specifically pines for a very specific piece of hardware she owned, a red slider phone,
where the screen physically pushed upward to reveal a full tactile keyboard.
She claims she achieved record typing speed because she could physically feel the raised bumps on the key
and construct entire text messages without ever looking at the device.
We must consider what was lost when the technology industry forced absolute physical conformity.
Today, almost every human being on the planet carries an identical smooth glass rectangle.
Whether it operates on iOS or Android, visually, they are indistinguishable monolithic slabs.
Right. There's zero physical character.
But in the early 2000s, technology possessed tactile personality.
A hot pink flip phone communicated a vastly different aesthetic and social signaling than a swivel phone or a bulky mechanical site.
The physical architectural design of the device was an extension of individual expression.
The transition to uniform, frictionless glass screens perfectly mirrors a broader cultural shift towards streamlined, algorithmically and
she even notes her intense resistance to that.
She states she was the absolute last person in her family to surrender and purchase a smartphone
because she stubbornly clung to that red slider keyboard.
She resisted the gravitational pull of the uniform glass screen until she was essentially mocked by her peers into conforming.
Now, in the context of this deep dive into early 2000 pop culture and the reevaluation of past behaviors, there is a specific segment regarding the music industry of that era that we need to address based on the source material.
Yes, the source features a very specific discussion between the host and her live stream chat that acts as a cultural audit.
The chat actively calls out Justin Timberlake for appropriating Black culture in the early 2000s.
They contrast him highly unfavorably with his NSYNC bandmate, J.C. Chase.
And they specifically reference an anecdote brought to light in Britney Spears' recent memoir,
where Timberlake allegedly utilized African-American vernacular English AAVE in a highly awkward performative attempt to fit in with the R&B artist,
who reportedly laughed at the attempt.
To be absolutely clear, we are impartially reporting that this specific cultural critique occurred between the author and her audience within the source material.
We are not endorsing, validating, or taking a side on the cultural appropriation claims made by the participants in the live stream.
However, it is analytically significant because it serves as another prime example of how the stream functions as an hindsight.
It illustrates how modern digital communities use the ethical and sociological lens of the present to critically reevaluate the normalized pop culture artifacts of the past.
It's the exact same psychological process as looking back at a performative 2012 Facebook post.
Just applied to macro pop culture instead of a micro personal timeline.
It's about looking at the media we consumed, the aesthetics we adopted, and the behaviors society normalized.
And suddenly seeing the underlying structural flaws with the clarity of
Precisely. It is an ongoing audit of both personal and cultural digital footprint.
So after traversing all of this, what does this actually mean?
We began this deep dive looking at a woman sitting in her bedroom,
Exhausted, eating a cinnamon twist donut.
supposedly celebrating the triumphant finish line of a long publishing journey.
But what we actually uncovered was the intricate, draining, and beautifully complex reality of an independent creator holding up the infrastructure of an entire business ecosystem with her bare hands.
We analyzed the crushing logistical burden of managing global shipping expectations and the strategic peril of decade-long audiobook contracts.
We deconstructed the invisible cognitive architecture required to write a narrative transition.
And the constant algorithmic fear of internet misinterpretation.
We examined the profound, devastating emotional toll of attempting to manufacture fictional violence while actively surviving the daily, grinding trauma of a spouse's severe medical emergency.
And we looked closely through the powerful, unmasked lens of
We explored how autistic pattern recognition allows a human brain to mathematically weave 4 massive fantasy books together, like a complex 3D lanyard.
Even while that exact same nervous system misfires and registers a light, comforting touch as agonizing physical trauma.
And finally, confronted the cringe-inducing mirror of our own internet nostalgia.
We looked at the perfectly preserved, searchable archives of our internalized misogyny.
The lost tactile expression of our early digital hardware.
And the ongoing cultural audit of the media we once without.
Why should you, the listener, care about the intricacies of an indie author's life?
Because whether you are a corporate manager prepping for a board meeting, a fan catching up on your favorite Romantasy series, or just a human being trying to navigate a deeply overwhelming Tuesday,
This is the invisible human labor behind every single piece of media you consume.
you are never just interacting with a product.
You are interacting with the finely tuned survival mechanisms of another.
You are consuming the direct output of their trauma, their clinical neurology, and their raw.
And importantly, just like the creator in the source material, you are also actively navigating your own hidden transit.
You are managing your own daily sensory overloads.
And you are constantly trying to reconcile the unformed version of who you were 10 years ago with the reality of who you are today.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over as we end this deep dive.
We have firmly established today that an author's neurological wiring, their capacity for pattern recognition, and their acute personal trauma dictate not just the words printed on the page,
but the very structural blueprints and genres of the stories they are capable of telling.
They pivot to rom-coms when the real world gets too deadly.
They rely on the mathematics of lanyards to build their empires.
So the next time you open a novel and allow yourself to get completely lost in a fictional universe, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question.
Are you truly just reading a fantasy world?
Or are you actually just taking a guided tour through the meticulously designed architect of the author's own psychological survival mechanism? Think about that the next time you look for the finish.